This was Sam Kumar's house. After the earthquake, it became uninhabitable. For the last 2 years, Sam Kumar and his family have been living in a shelter made from scraps of metal.
And these two?
Yeah.
They fear the house could collapse at any moment. They still use the bottom of the house to make moonshine for supplemental income. He had only finished building the house a few weeks before the earthquake struck. He took out a loan from the government for around $8,000.
2%, they built this house in 8 lakh rupees.
This is an enormous amount of money for a rural Nepalese farmer.
2% is rate of interest.
Okay, so this was an 8 lakh rupee house.
An 8 lakh rupee house, and they couldn't repay it.
And is the family living here in the temporary shelter?
Temporary shelter, they just cook and sell alcohol here.
Okay.
What they say is the money from farming isn't enough, so they need an additional income.
So it's alcohol. Okay. It is very sad. This is a very nice house before the earthquake.
On April 25th of 2015, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake devastated central Nepal. Many of the buildings in Kathmandu and the surrounding areas lacked structural support. 600,000 buildings crumbled like paper mache. Nearly 9,000 people died, and some 22,000 were injured.
Kathmandu this morning, a city familiar with aftershocks, but a sense that this is something different. People pouring into the streets, wondering if their homes are safe.
Crews are racing against time to find survivors of the worst earthquake to hit Nepal in 80 years. Rescue teams have found some people alive in the rubble, but hopes of finding more survivors, those hopes are fading.
By September, the Nepalese government developed a grant program under the newly founded National Reconstruction Authority. The NRA determined that reconstruction costs would require $9.4 billion. But so far, only $4.1 billion has been pledged by funding agencies. In March of 2017, student researchers from Texas, Japan, and Nepal traveled to 3 remote villages on the hillside of the Kathmandu Valley. The goal was to better understand the conditions that remained in the wake of the earthquake and the barriers that hinder the reconstruction process today. The NRA established a grant program that offers earthquake victims around $3,000 to aid in the reconstruction of their homes. But given the agricultural economy of the rural areas of Nepal, victims have found the grant to be of little assistance.
So this is your house?
Yeah.
This is where your house was?
Yeah.
And they've moved all the rubble over here?
Yeah. Staying or living in this kind of house, so of course when it's rain and even in the cold season it's so cold.
Like Sam Kumar and the girl, families who lost their homes have been dwelling in shelters made from CGI metal sheets. These families experience extreme poverty and can't afford the costs of removing the rubble of their previous homes, let alone the costs of materials, transportation, and construction for a new home. Many of the earthquake victims are unable to perform the labor themselves because village demographics tend to be comprised of the elderly and women and children. Young Nepalese men often travel abroad to earn an income and send it home to their families. The World Bank estimates that Nepal receives remittances equivalent to 25% of the country's GDP, the 3rd highest in the world.
I think, so I actually got to meet with USAID, and then on top of that got to go out and visit villagers, and I think what I really learned was how important it is to take the lessons from every stakeholder in a project. Because I think you had the goals from the government and the government in Nepal and the National Reconstruction Authority, and then you had the goals and really the barriers to rebuilding the homes of the homeowners in the villages. And so what we were really finding was a huge barrier was there's a miscommunication between what the goals were from the government and the goals of the villagers and how to accomplish those things ultimately mismatched.
The biggest messages I got from the interviews were that they expected the grant to cover the entire cost of the house, which the government never intended it to cover the entire rebuilding process. They only intended it to be a supplement to the rebuild. So I think it was just a poor communication, or a lack of communication on the government's part, which gave these people kind of false assumptions about what the money should cover. I think the other big takeaway I got from the interviews is really how difficult it was for the people to rebuild. To us, it seems easy that, I want to build a house. We can build a house pretty quickly. I need to rebuild a house. Say after Katrina, we could do it pretty quickly. It's a completely different challenge when you have to carry all your building supplies 50 or 100 meters up a hill from the nearest road, and then that road may not be passable half the year. So I think that really understanding the real problem and the real conditions which these people are trying to rebuild was one of the biggest takeaways I got.
If an NRA representative determines a homeowner has a claim for the grant, they must fill out the proper paperwork and have access to a bank. Some villagers informed us that inspectors didn't come to their villages until very recently. If a homeowner does qualify for the grant, the first installment is for 50,000 rupees. This is around $500 US.
Yeah. So what she's saying is that she has gotten the 5,000 rupees from the government, 50,000 rupees from the government, and she knows that they have the pictures of what kind of houses that is supposed to be built in the VDC, so it's the Village Development Committee. So she's like confused as to how she is going to start with just 50,000. And he also thinks that the government money will only be used for dismantling the house because it's not enough for more than that. So he's going to have to invest by himself.
Or any of them maybe, or I was going to ask if any of them are able to save and kind of make up the difference.
Yeah, he's conflicted about that because the government money is never going to be enough. So he is going to have to invest some of his own money, but he's not sure if he'll be able to build an entire house with that or not.
So you have to pay for the paperwork and the permits and the transportation and the labor. It's a lot of money.
In order to receive the subsequent installment of 150,000 rupees, the homeowner must meet the building requirements for the new home. However, this requires removing what remained from the previous home and building a foundation, the costs of which exceed what is provided by the first installment of the grant. We explored the possibility that alternative building technologies could help mitigate the costs of reconstruction by researching local NGOs that used bamboo, hempcrete, earth bricks, rammed earth, and earth bag housing technologies. Alternative technologies in general were not well liked by the villagers. They prefer a traditional two-story brick home. Hempcrete and earthbag housing were simply not liked. The bamboo and rammed earth technology, as used by Abari, was well liked, but the buildings they construct were more expensive to build than that of the conventional housing. We saw the most promise in earth brick technology, because you could still build a traditional two-story home, and the bricks cut back on some of the costs associated with transporting traditional style oven bricks.
NGOs that visited Nepal were able to rebuild some temporary structures that the residents are still currently living in 2 years after the earthquake. These are 10 shelters, very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter. Some of our alternative technologies that we looked at would address some of these issues as far as regulating temperature.
I think the program is working, and I think when you compare the program to other reconstruction efforts after disasters in other countries, it is one of the better methods, better solutions, but it takes time. I think a lot of what we have to do is reframe our timeline and our expected timeline and understand that we're not going to rebuild under Western standards. Nepal is going to rebuild according to their own timeline, which is much longer than the 2 years we thought it should have taken. and is much longer than anything we could think of in the West.
So first, there would definitely be the stakeholders, getting the input from people on different levels, the villager standpoint, even the economically disadvantaged people who can't rebuild right away, the people in the government, small business owners, and even big business owners, and try and get their input on what they think are the most pressing things that need to be done first, and supply chain issues and barriers. So I think just getting the input of all the stakeholders in the project is really important. And then second was, one thing I didn't realize going into this is the timeline of the project. I came in thinking, oh, it's 2 years, and how are these people not in homes yet? But then as I got to meet with some of the USAID people, they're structuring it very much from a development standpoint. This is after the disaster had happened and that direct relief had happened, and what they're trying to do is how do you sustainably get people into homes for more than just the next 60 days. This is building the foundation for next generation. So it takes a lot longer, and I think I didn't expect that timeline. So I think flexibility and having a realistic timeline is really important.
I guess the biggest takeaway would be to not assume you know the answer to the question going in. Just to try and figure out as many questions to ask as you can, and then answer those, because we went in assuming it was a technology issue, and I think we came out realizing that technology was probably the only thing that worked there, and everything else seemed to have a bunch of issues surrounding it. I think we assumed it was one thing and went into the field study kind of assuming one issue and came out understanding it to be a number of other issues completely unrelated to what our initial premise was. So I'd say keep an open mind and really just look for the facts and where the facts lead you.
But really, the biggest issue is money. Because everyone favors RCC construction, so reinforced concrete, it's very expensive. Most people would like 2 stories. It takes time to save up the money necessary to even build the foundation and then supply the materials. You also need special permitting from the government to start any building project because of new earthquake standards.
We aren't sure what the future holds for Sam Kumar, the girl, the many families we interviewed, and the thousands of other earthquake victims in Nepal. The government does not have enough funds to provide the assistance needed to make a meaningful impact on reconstruction efforts. There also needs to be substantial economic development and development of infrastructure in rural Nepal to empower citizens to tackle reconstruction on their own.